can you guess what young farmers think the biggest threat to the future of farming is? It's mental health. Mental health. There's very high suicide rates amongst farmers, and it's a very stressful job where you have to get up very early every morning, you don't get a day off, where your margins are affected by things like the weather, which are out of your control. So we've got to think about like the food crisis in relation to mental health. And I think when we start to think about these issues in an intersectional way, we can realise how interconnected everything is, and realise that our personal passion project, whilst it might be a mental health, in the end, if it's done right, will also help our food supply.
Ella Robertson McKay serves as the Managing Director of One Young World, a global community for young leaders dedicated to fostering responsible and effective leadership. Ella is a prominent activist and an advocate for women's involvement in politics, recognised for her influential contributions as a co-author of How to Make a Difference, an authoritative guide to activism. Driven by her dedication to promoting social change and empowering women in the political sphere, Ella continues to showcase an unwavering commitment to advancing the causes of young leaders and human rights defenders. Let's learn.
Well, we're so proud of all the action that takes place in between summits. To date, One Young World ambassadors have impacted 35.8 million people around the world.
35.8 million?
Yeah, and that's direct impact. And the way that we're able to do that is by
Well, thanks so much again for joining us on the second series of the School of Social Justice video podcast. And we've been really excited to get you on as a guest teacher to share kind of lessons you've learned in leading One Young World, as well as throughout your career and your life. So thank you for joining us. Can't wait to have this conversation. To start off with, it would be great to kind of learn a bit about yourself and One Young World and hear about kind of your views on social justice. But first off, tell us a bit about yourself and One Young World.
Well, thank you so much for having me. For listeners who don't know who I am, which is basically everyone, my name's Ella Robertson McKay, and I run an international charity called One Young World, and we're known as the Global Community for Young Leaders. And every year we're best known for our summit, which brings together about 2,000 young leaders from every single country in the world. And these young leaders are entrepreneurs, politicians, journalists, scientists, business people, change makers, activists, the kind of people that that you bring into your fantastic movement as well. But having every single country in the room is really special, because you turn to your left and you speak to someone from Venezuela about political uprisings, and you turn to your right and you speak to someone from Vanuatu about climate change in small and developing states. And so it's a really, really special opportunity to understand how all these global issues are not just interconnected in some kind of academic way, but they become interconnected in a personal way, because you know people on the front lines in every single country. Beyond the summit itself, where we have fantastic, very well-known speakers such as, we had the late Kofi Annan and late Archbishop Desmond Tutu, but also people like Richard Branson, Ellie Goulding, Jane Goodall, right through to inspiring entertainers like Tiny Temper, and inspiring Olympians like Mark Tewksbury, who was the first openly gay gold medalist in North America, telling their stories and creating intergenerational dialogue. So summits kind of what we're best known for and where we're most visible. But once you go to One Young World Summit, you become a One Young World ambassador and have access to all our alumni opportunities, which include funding. We gave away, I think, over $1 million last year to young people on front lines, media opportunities, networking, mentoring, and all the sorts of tools that young leaders need to accelerate change in their communities around the world.
Amazing. And I've been really lucky to actually witness and see the work that you've put together firsthand, having been a guest at one of your summits, talking about climate change. And so I really have seen firsthand the impact that One Young World has. And I can't wait to share kind of the lessons you've learned as a leader of the organisation. And I'm really curious to know, given all of your experience in running One Young World and all of the young people who want to seek to make the world fairer, what does social justice mean to you?
Well, I think that it is about that word fairness and how fairness plays out in society. And it's so interesting, as humans, we have this innate instinct for fairness in the same way that we have smell, vision, and all these other senses. We have an innate sense of what's fair. And you see that in very young children. They go, that's not fair, he got more time with the blocks than I did. Or that's not fair. Her mum isn't around. There's this sort of innate sense that comes into our humanity about how we experience fairness. And as we all know, there are many, many ways that the world is deeply unfair. Some of those are societal, some of those are environmental, some of those are economic. And for me, social justice is the way in which all of these fairness dynamics play out. And for me, a socially just world comes down to dignity, and a world where all people have dignity. And actually Crown Prince Haakon of Norway founded the movement for global dignity, and it's one of the things that stuck with me most at One Young World. Is one of those lessons, because if you apply the lens of dignity to any situation, whether that's people who've just, at the time of recording, it's not long after the earthquake in Turkey and Syria, whether that's people who've been taken out of the rubble in the way that they are treated and their homes and families are treated, whether that's people crossing oceans in dangerous conditions on boats, whether that's people who need access to reproductive health care in North America. If you put dignity at the heart of the way that they're treated, then actually you end up in a socially just world where people have good outcomes. Because when we're treated in an undignified way, or people don't respect our dignity as individual human beings, ultimately something is unfair and something is unjust. And I think sometimes it's really hard, particularly when we talk about equity. So for lots of people who listen will be familiar with this, but equity is the difference is looking at trying to create the same outcomes for people, not just the same opportunities. Because if we all have the opportunity to run a race, but I've just broken my foot, it's sort of fair, it's sort of not fair, depending on what you're looking to achieve. But actually, what we want is every child to get the same level of education, or every child to have the same type of health when they're 18. We're not just looking at equality of opportunity, we are looking at trying to equalise outcomes. And when we look at things through this perspective of equity, the equitable outcome that you want is that everyone's treated with dignity. And I think it's a really human way to look at it, because sometimes it's easy to get tied up into statistics and quotas and checkboxes, and ultimately people become numbers on a piece of paper. But if you imagine someone that you really love in the world and they are unwell, whether it's mentally or physically, and they're experiencing a difficult time, you want everyone to treat them with dignity. And that is something that everyone around the world, no matter what country you're in, whatever your culture is, that's what they want to.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And I didn't know about that program, but dignity is such a powerful word and necessary for, as you say, for a fair society to flourish. I'm very curious about, though, why we need to try and focus on building a more fairer society, particularly at a time when things are tough in terms of global economy, things going down. People tend to look inward or to themselves and forget about their impact on society and the wider community and neighbourhoods. Like, why should businesses, individuals, organisations really think about their impact on society and social justice?
Yeah, it's a great question. And ultimately, there's kind of two ways of looking at the self-interested part of it. If you're kind of trying to convince people who aren't that invested. Number one is pure self-interest, that in unequal societies, instability will follow. And we've seen that throughout human history. Inequality is unsustainable, and it is unstable. So you are more likely to see difficult political situations, you're more likely to have difficult economic environments, potentially even violence, protests, disruptions. And you can see that playing out, currently in the UK. We have a lot of inequality and social injustice when it comes to cost of food, housing, and so on. And you're seeing more strike action. Now, whether or not you agree or disagree with industrial action, that's a matter for one's personal political opinion in the UK. It is hugely disruptive to the business environment. And we are all losing out as a result of the inequality of society when we're experiencing, nurses on strike or teachers on strike, and then parents then can't go to work, right? It is causing negative effects on society. And the root of that action is based in inequality, right through to where there are riots for food in other parts of the world, or riots for water. And so, number one, it's unsustainable and it leads to instability. Number two, I think that we've got to think about this through a lens of empathy, like basic human empathy. And what does that mean? It doesn't mean I know what it's like to walk in your shoes. It means, I've got absolutely no idea what it's like to walk in your shoes. I can't imagine what it's like to be in a landslide in Peru. No, I've been to Peru. But I still care, and I'm still going to try and understand what that's like for you. Because ultimately, there but for the grace of God go I. I've worked very hard for lots of things in life, but I was born in London in a peaceful society. I was given a good education thanks to family situations that I didn't contribute to. I'm, relatively healthy. Those are not things that I worked hard for. Those were things that just happened for me. And I think when, obviously we talk a lot about privilege and things like that in the current societal discourse at the moment. But what it comes down to is trying to find empathy for other human beings, because it was not necessarily was going to work out that way for you. And so if you're finding yourself rolling your eyes or going, gosh, another social justice issue, or, oh, another thing I'm supposed to worry about, when quite frankly, the world's very complicated right now. We've all got a lot on our plates. Try and look through that lens of like, if that were me, what would I want somebody sitting halfway across the world to do about it? And try to keep that sense of, it could be me in another life, that could be my family. And I think when we dig deep and we find that emotional connection with the dignity of another human being, of course we're motivated to try and make the world a more socially just place.
For sure, and really kind of reflective response there, just in terms of you looking at your own experience, and for me also very similar to you, born and raised in London now. If I was born like my cousin in the Philippines with a Filipino passport, the opportunities I've had would have been much less. And kind of, I'm curious to know, was there a moment in your own life where you recognize that, which has led you to make the choice to kind of commit your whole life and career to these kinds of causes?
Yeah, actually there was, and it's really, really kind of inane, but I remember having the opportunity at one point to go and work in quite a well-paid job in part of America, and I was like, oh, a lovely lifestyle, and housing there compared to the UK, you can buy big beautiful houses with a pool and things that really are like, it's an American dream kind of thing. Yeah. And then I thought, I've happened to have a very good education, and I managed to go into a wonderful university, and I was given a lot of opportunities that I worked hard with the opportunities that I was given, but I didn't earn those any more than your cousin in the Philippines or any other person in the world would have earned them. And I sort of, I personally am a person of faith, and I sort of went, if God has dealt me this hand, I have a responsibility to do more with it than to just kind of try and have a personally profitable corporate career. Yeah. Now, that's not to say to denigrate anyone who chooses to pursue a business career as their career of choice. We need loads of fantastic businesses in order to drive innovation, to fund research, to solve the problems of everyday citizens. But for me, I really felt that I had to do something, particularly on climate, and realizing that we're in this time period where climate action is a now or never thing. And that you and I are going to kind of grow up as adults, as young change makers in this age where we were either going to be part of the solution or part of the problem. And for me, I felt like if I had been given all these opportunities, I wasn't able to kind of sit this one out, essentially.
That's fascinating, just also because it points to your process of choosing an issue to confront and face. As you said, the world is very complicated, complex. There's a lot going on, and there's always an issue to be worked on, raised in the news. Did you have a way of coming to the conclusion that climate was one of the main issues you wanted to kind of look at?
This is such a good question, and I co-wrote a book called How to Make a Difference.
There you go.
And I think the opening chapter is, and you'd have to, I'm sorry to my publisher if I got this wrong, but I'm pretty sure the opening chapter is how to choose a cause that matters to you. Okay. And a lot of people will say that climate should be, ultimately, none of us can do any of the other social justice things like feminism or food security or any of those issues in a world where climate justice isn't achieved. So a lot of people, for them, climate is just kind of the top line issue. But what I would say is, and I say this in the book, is if you have something that matters to you, let's say, for example, you are a wheelchair user and you care about making the world more accessible for other wheelchair users, I can't convince you that that is not the thing that is closest to your heart. If that's what you wake up in the morning thinking about and you go to sleep planning about, that's your cause. And we need people to be active on every cause within social justice. I think whether UN devised the Sustainable Development Goals, they probably thought they'd have 3 or 5 or 10, nice round number, and ended up with 17, right?
Yeah.
There are so many issues in the world that need fixing. And I think we should all feel comfortable about working on our individual passion projects.
Okay.
Having said that, the way to go, okay, well, I'm really worried about my issue, but it feels a bit niche. So if you have that concern, I would say the way to offset that is to go, what issues, plural, does my personal passion project intersect with? How can I make this an intersectional issue? So if your passion is food bank use, how can you make that intersect with gender equality, for example? What local women's organisations might you get in touch with to work together with? And that way you can make a difference on multiple issues, not just your passion project. And I think that's how we achieve growth, is by finding sometimes unlikely areas of collaboration between two topics. To give you an example, I chaired a panel of young farmers in the run-up to the UN Food Systems Summit, which was this really big conference where everyone in the world who works in food did something and said something, came up with a big plan for how we're going to feed the planet as our population continues to grow and our environment is more tested by climate change. Can you guess what young farmers think the biggest threat to the future of farming is?
My guess would be government.
Yeah, good guess. Lots of people thought maybe climate or it's mental health. Mental health. There's very high suicide rates amongst farmers, and it's a very stressful job where you have to get up very early every morning. You don't get a day off, where your margins are affected by things like the weather, which are out of your control. And something like 70% of young farmers thought it was the biggest threat to the profession as a whole. So I wouldn't have necessarily thought before I did this panel that the strength of our mental health care systems would affect our farming and then affect our food supply. So we've got to think about like the food crisis in relation to mental health. And I think when we start to think about these issues in an intersectional way, we can realise how interconnected everything is and realise that our personal passion project, whilst it might be a mental health, in the end, if it's done right, will also help our food supply.
It's an amazing example. And whilst you were talking, I was just thinking of examples that people give of like kind of genius creatives or genius folk from history, and how Picasso went to the African continent, saw the Mars and brought that back and improved his artwork. The same way in the craft of change making, learning from other places and different people really adds to the ability to innovate and to achieve proper outcomes. But I would have never guessed that mental health was the main issue. And I think the example there shows the importance of bringing people together and also doing research and having open conversations. I mean, to go into a bit more of the methods of change, like I'd love to know from you, examples of methods of change that you've personally utilised to achieve a form of social justice. You've mentioned climate change already. You've mentioned how One Young World brings people together. You've mentioned your book. So many different examples, but I'd love to hear about kind of the process from seeing the problem and then how you responded to it.
I think, thank you for mentioning the book, and it is available in all good bookshops and probably some bad ones too. I mean, are there any good and are there any bad bookshops actually? But I think when you say, just to expand on this point about bringing people together, I think the power of One Young World relies in convening and bringing people together with different perspectives, shared goals, sometimes differing goals, but ultimately bringing people together, whether that's in the online world or ideally in person wherever possible, to connect and to share and to listen. Never underestimate the importance of bringing people together. And if you're trying to get something done in your community, bring people together as a group, bring people together in a way that promotes dialogue, where people want to listen to each other. I think in order to do that effectively, do your research into what makes good meetings, what makes good discussions, how you can facilitate things so people don't feel defensive, so people can be vulnerable, so people can be honest. A lot of the time we spend time trying to gloss over problems, trying to pretend some problems are surmountable when we don't know how to overcome them. But actually, when you bring people together in a truly vulnerable setting, it's amazing how on the same page people often are. So the power of convening is something that we're really passionate about at One Young World. And I think with that is then building community. No one can change the world on their own. And when you look at things like, whether it's the civil rights movement or any other movement, it was about community and bringing people together through lots of different groups so that not only so that there was the actual visible manifestation of look, loads of people care about this issue, but so people were supported as humans in their desire to make change. Because being a change maker is hard. Being an activist is really hard. It's draining. It's lonely. It's really challenging. So it's really important that you have colleagues, friends to work with, to commune with, and to bounce ideas off, and also just to have that moral support and solidarity.
Yeah, those are two C's, convening and community. Power convening, I've seen, has been so important in pushing things forward. But also, there's often the criticism that it's just all talk. I personally disagree with that. I believe that in a democracy, talk is the core of improving and progress. It's the peaceful means of, sorting out conflict.
Yeah.
What do you say to folk who say bringing people together in an event is not action? Whereas, as I say, I do think it's action. I mean, most of what happens in Parliament is talking and having conversations and discussing about what the future should be like for our respective nations. It would be great to know that from the One Young World examples of the power of convening versus this idea that you need to act when it's not happening.
I really get very frustrated if anyone tries to frame One Young World as a talking shop in any way, because we're not about conversation, we're about action.
Yeah.
But in order to act, you need colleagues, you need ideas, you need contacts, you need community, just for moral support. So I do think that action relies on community. But in terms of how do you change a talking shop into an action shop? Because lots of people will have a community group, and we've all gone to them when everyone's gone around and talked and nothing's got done, and you just want to tear your hair out. I think that's a universal experience.
Yeah.
So you need to be intentional. You need to be intentional about what you're setting out to achieve, who you're bringing together, and why. And be really explicit with people. This is why we're coming together. This is what we're going to discuss. This meeting is not for this. It's for that. Again, when I talked about analysing problems, like being honest about problems as well in that meeting. So, if challenges do come up later down the line, you're prepared for that friction. I think then success in life is about follow-up. We can all sit around and have these inspiring conversations and feel like we're all saying important things, but ultimately it's about follow-up and follow through. And I think that's where One Young World really succeeds, is that we have an amazing community team at our office in London, and then this incredible network of managing and coordinating ambassadors who are volunteers around the world who do things within their regions. But there's constant opportunities to stay involved with One Young World, and we're constantly reaching out to people to find out what they're doing and how we can help them, and simultaneously being reactive and responsive when people come back to us to say, hello, I'm looking at setting up a solar business in Central Asia, can you introduce me to people? We're able to provide quite a bespoke service, but the emphasis has to stay on action. And academia and thinking and all of those sorts of things are important, but I would say if you're looking to convene people because you want to get something done, make sure you are talking about action explicitly and keep the focus on action, and don't let it descend into pontificating and proselytizing and just talking for talking's sake. And I think, as an example of just keeping the focus on action made a difference to us, we were fundraising for the COVID Young Leaders Fund, which maybe we can talk about in a bit. Yeah. And on the proposal deck itself, we went through it and we wanted to really convey urgency, and we made a little graphic of a stamp, a stamp where you can stamp a piece of paper, and it was red on the sort of blue and white deck, and it said action now. And we put that on every slide. And it was just it's a communications device, of course, but it was a way to emphasize, yes, all of these, talking and thinking about all of these issues is important, but what the world needs now is action. And I would say kind of having that action now mentality in projects really helps move things from talking shop into action shop.
I feel like we need that action now stamp across all the school social justice programs, because totally right. And I think from what I've seen between the summits, that happens. Just the connections that are made, the conversations that I had outside the summits happen because initially people were brought together. You mentioned the COVID Leaders Program. I'd love to hear an example of kind of when between the summits, some action has been taken by maybe some of your delegates and some members of the community. An example of how they've used a particular method of change to then achieve some progress.
Well, we're so proud of all the action that takes place in between summits. So to date, and our new impact analysis is coming out next month, I think, but to date, One Young World ambassadors have impacted 35.8 million people around the world.
35.8 million?
Yeah, and that's direct impact. So we're really, we know that that's a slightly conservative number because we only like to report on things that we've been able to analyse, but we're really, really proud of the scale of the work. And the way that we're able to do that is by connecting people, funding people, inspiring people, doing all of these important things. With the COVID Young Leaders Fund, obviously the world stopped when COVID hit, but we realised that lots of young people were on the front lines where help was needed most. So we managed to raise about $500,000, which we distributed directly to projects, which was everything from, we now know that COVID is airborne, but of course we were all being encouraged to wash our hands and say happy birthday twice, and people will remember that. But that's really easy to say, but what about when you don't have running water in a refugee camp? What about when you don't? So it was we were trying to address COVID challenges in places where people in the communities that really needed the most urgent help. And it was amazing to see how well the money was spent and how much impact those projects had. And I think about 660,000 people were helped by the work of the projects we managed to fund. So really, really phenomenal. And I just say on youth-led development, unfortunately, I think One Young World has now helped move the needle on this. So our research shows that youth-led development is some of the most effective types of development because young people are right at the forefront of the issues there.
Define that.
So that's projects and social change led by young people tends to be more effective than any other type of social change. So because young people are on the ground, they see the grassroots problems, but also they tend to be some of the most innovative people because they're exposed to more technology than previous generations. But because people are young, they tend to be underfunded. So the most funding, over 90% of funding, and I think One Young World has now moved the needle on this, to youth-led projects was found to be under $5,000. So they were, even though the work was really good and really impactful, they were getting these itty-bitty little grants, kind of an equivalent of financial pat on the head, rather than serious 7-8 figure investment that their projects really deserve. And we are really trying to move the needle on that by increasing the grant amounts that we're giving to young people and encouraging funders, whether that's business or government or other NGOs, to not be cynical about the power of young people and to, it might feel like taking a chance, but actually all the data shows it's not taking a chance to great use of money.
You pointed to something which hasn't really been discussed in our first season of Social Justice Video Podcast, where that in order to achieve change, individuals, people who are watching the video podcast need to have the support of people around them, whether it be government, businesses, the community, mentors, funders. What's your message to those folk as to how they can support young people in the future? I mean, our mission is to train the next generation of the Martin Luther Kings. How can members of society help that next generation?
Well, first of all, I'm oneyoungworld.com. We are, and so like your work, please do reach out to us if it's of interest, because we've got lots of ways you can get involved. But beyond that, I think it's a question of looking who's around you, and looking to young leaders that you know. If I would say one of the reasons why One Young World has been able to be as successful as we've been so far, and I think will continue to grow, is if you say to most people in the world, whatever field they work in, do you know a young person who gives you hope for the future?
Yeah.
Nearly everyone says yes. And that's so special.
Do you know a young person who gives you hope for the future? Is that the question?
Yes.
Okay.
And nearly everyone says yes.
Yeah.
And again, that might be their own children or grandchildren, or it may be a young person they work with who they go, gosh, they're fantastic. And I think there is really something about that sort of hope, the hope and potential of youth, that when people get older, they still continue to be inspired and moved by. And I think it's a question of asking those young people what they need.
Yeah.
And really listening to them. If they say they need funding, don't go, well, I can give you free mentorship. I mean, if that's what you're able to give, but try and if you're a less young person, try and use the network and credibility that you have established to help them, because ultimately young people have what they lack is network and reputation, well, network and access to contacts, money and funding, reputation and credibility, and particularly in some societies in Asian Africa, for example, there is also, I think, age-conscious hierarchy where elders are more respected and you're expected to wait your turn. That you see that all around the world. But if you can help young people close the gap when it comes to network, funding, and credibility, so they're taken as seriously and they have the same tools in their toolkit as someone who's 10 or 20 years older, actually a lot of the world's problems would probably get solved quite a lot faster.
That's really helpful. And as you were speaking, I was thinking about the young people who've inspired me, but also people in history who've also inspired himself, and others with social justice. I'm curious to know if there's a historic figure that has inspired you. You mentioned the late Desmond Tutu as well as the late Kofi Annan, who had a pleasure meeting once, very briefly at Davos one time. Yeah. And you work with these people very regularly. Is there somebody out there who's famous or someone from history that has inspired you, and why?
I mean, so many through One Young World, and I feel really privileged to have spoken to them and to have known some of them, and it's a real honour. I'd say President Mary Robinson of Ireland is a big personal inspiration to me. She's Ireland's first female president. She went on to be the UNHCR, the head of human rights, the UN's commissioner. And she decided to bring about... one of the things she said at One Young World was that she said she was an issues person, not a politics person. And I thought that was a really good thing to be. That really struck me. I was like, that's the kind of person I'd like to be.
Yeah.
One of the things she did was to stand up for people's, particularly women's right to use contraception in the Republic of Ireland. And when she did this, she's a religious lady.
Yeah.
All priests in Ireland were instructed to condemn her from the pulpit in church that Sunday. And how personally challenging and devastating that must be to somebody, but to decide to be brave and to carry on with what you thought to be right, regardless of such institutional criticism from a very powerful institution from men in every single village in your country. And that, to me, was very brave and inspiring. The other is an activist called Minnie Jean Brown Trickey, who, when schools began to be desegregated in America, was one of the Little Rock Nine, who some people who know about the civil rights movement will know the photos of the high school students surrounded by US Marshals and so on, who were the first to desegregate their school despite massive racist, white supremacist protests. And she was part of the Little Rock Nine and is a really fascinating lady. And her, she's one of these sort of elders of the civil rights movement now in the United States. And her advice to me was, when it comes to activism, you've got to do it with joy. It's hard. These issues are hard, they are challenging, they are depressing, but you have to have a laugh.
Yeah.
You can take the issue seriously, you have to take yourself seriously, you can make friends, and you have to do it with joy. And if you imbue that sense of we're going to do it with joy into your work, then actually those difficult and depressing days are more bearable and there is more hope to keep going.
That is a wonderful message to leave with, particularly because, as you say, some of these are so often traumatizing experiences to push people to try and make a difference. People's lives are at threat, at risk, and oftentimes people that activists burn out. And so that need for community, that need for joy, I love that. We definitely need a lot more joy within the activist space, and I think there are amazing examples that you just shared. I'm curious now to turn slightly a bit more to individuals and the kind of skill sets that not only young people but folk who kind of might have signed a petition or joined a march, the first ever protest, and they want to learn a bit more about how to make a bigger impact. What kind of skills do you think aspiring change makers need in order to learn how to make it?
Well, I mean, there are more and more skills that are valuable, and I think Kumi Naidu, who was previously head of Greenpeace and Amnesty International, he said to me, one of the things activists need to know is they don't have to be the person who goes to jail. Some movements will require people to be that brave and be on the front lines, but he said when I went and put a big Greenpeace banner on a big oil rig, there was I went to jail for it, but someone needed to steer the boat. Someone needed to film me and take the photographs. So lawyers need to get me out of jail. So I think the thing is to first of all think about what your skill set really is, whether you're an engineer, a nurse, an organizer, whatever it might be, and go, actually, my skill set is useful already. I don't need to reskill. I need to apply my skills to my cause. And, every single cause needs everything from cleaners and janitors and people who help make our environment wonderful, and that's fantastic work, right through to administrators and accountants. And actually don't think your skill set isn't relevant somewhere, because it will be. I think then what I would say to people is the next, probably most important skill is research and information management. And what I mean by information management is your ability to sift through information and identify good and bad information. So there's probably a better name for it, but that's what I'm calling it in my head right now. Because there's a lot of bad information out there, and it's really easy to go and start campaigning on something that's completely wrong, because we're being fed so much through malice and through accident, bad information. But informing yourselves on issues and continuing to inform yourself and stay curious and to learn is probably the most important thing you can do. And you and I will work with a lot of young people who describe having something that is something like imposter syndrome. Yeah. And I always say to them, the best way to overcome imposter syndrome is reading. And now I appreciate not everyone likes reading, so podcasts, audiobooks, all sorts of videos, all sorts of ways, watching videos, all sorts of ways to access information just beyond reading. But if you've done your research, you've done your homework, and you show up, even if you have imposter syndrome, you're going to have a moment in that meeting where someone says something and you go, oh yes, I read that paper. Or, oh yes, I watched that documentary. Or you're going to have a moment, even better, where someone says something that's nonsense and you go, actually, I think you'll find that if you read research paper 3, you'll find that's not true. And those are the moments that help you build confidence in life. Being in the room is important, but having the confidence to contribute will come from a knowledge base. And you don't want your contributions to come from a false sense of confidence or arrogance or speaking for the sake of it. But if you've genuinely got knowledge to contribute, then not only will you feel confident in your contribution because you'll know it's true and you'll know it's good and important, but actually what you're contributing is in turn valuable to your movement. So I would say look at your own skill set, find out how it can be applied. Don't feel that you need to do everything, and don't feel that you need to be the star either. That's really important. Is being in the background, doing unglamorous jobs are just as important to the success of a movement as being the Martin Luther King giving an inspirational speech. But ultimately, building your knowledge, and the final thing I add on knowledge actually is reading and researching videos and things are all really good, but the most important type of knowledge is knowledge grounded in lived experience. Okay. So if you really care about domestic violence, but it's something that really makes you feel like you want to do something, the most important thing is to speak to people who've survived it, who are surviving it, who've got more experience in working with victims of domestic violence, and ground what you want to do based on their lived experience, not in your idea of what those people need. Particularly when it comes to international issues, I think it's really easy to go, well, what people in faraway country probably need is blah, blah, blah. And actually, if you spoke to them, that's what they need at all. So to recap on that, how can your own existing skill set be applied? Yeah. Don't feel you have to be the star. Feel like, know that every single job is important, and build up your knowledge base in order to build up your confidence. But build up your knowledge base in a way that is grounded in lived experience of the people you're trying to help.
Absolutely. There's so much in there, and I honestly can't wait to share that with your audience. I mean, on the first bit around kind of going where you are at already, oftentimes when people see a big problem, they often think, I need to learn, to do an MBA or a PhD in these issues in order to learn. And it's like, well, you know how to paint. Yeah. And maybe you can paint an amazing mural, which then brings attention to this issue with what you're already great at. Yeah. And that's a great reminder that folk inherently have something to offer. Exactly. A movement. And of course, a movement is not just, as you say, one person. Yeah. It is a collection of folk, a community. The bit about the star. So think about changes. Historically, we often see it from images of individuals standing in the pulpit. You mentioned Martin Luther King and his speeches. I mean, Martin Luther King is so much a part of what the school is trying to be, or is inspired by. I mean, can you talk a bit more about that? Because there's some people who might be afraid to step up because they think, actually, no, I need to be like Martin Luther King. When actually the message of the civil rights movement is you do have Martin Luther King, but you also have the millions of people who marched with him, alongside him. I mean, could you share a bit about the star issue?
I think, look, there are people who are going to be more inspiring than others because they've got an inspiring story to tell because of their life experience, because they're a good public speaker, because they're charismatic, because they're relatable, because they're funny. There are all sorts of things that make people inspiring, and that's wonderful. And I genuinely think that any person can be inspiring. But look, not everyone likes being the centre of attention. There are some people who don't even like being sung happy birthday to, right? Like it makes them cringe. So if you're that person, that's okay. As we said, all of the people that marched with Martin Luther King, all of the people that organised those marches, all of the people that distributed the literature, those were all as important bricks in that wall of civil rights movement as anybody. And I think Dr. King would have said the same thing. I think that if you would like to be a prominent person, then obviously practice the public speaking, practice the social media skills. There's so many ways to get your message across to people, and that's brilliant. But a really great movement for social justice will value all of its contributors. And whilst I appreciate that this isn't necessarily a social justice movement, when President Kennedy visited the Space Center and he said to a lady who I think was working as janitor, "What do you do here?" She said, "I'm putting a man on the moon." And that's the thing, is when we have a great mission that everyone really buys into, you know that your contribution, your skill set is actually helping achieve the greater cause. And I think when we're trying to build movements and build community, that's the kind of environment and an organisation that you want to be trying to create.
I'm just going to check the time. Perfect timing. We've got 5 minutes left, so final questions. Do you have anything else you'd like to share with our audience of aspiring change makers? Is there anything on your mind that you want to leave with the next generation or the current generation of people who want to hear from?
I think the world can feel really dark sometimes, and I think we have to be realistic about the level of instability and challenge that we currently face, and particularly on climate, how short a window we have. But at the same time, that should be inspiring to people. We could be the last generation to ever have to worry about climate change if we get this right. And we could be the first generation to not have any poverty if we get this right. There is so much potential in this moment. And I think whilst that's not to be in any way glib or uncynical about the problems that we currently face in the world, many of which are getting worse by the day, that should be a call to everybody that their actions are needed now more than ever. And the fact that things do look so bleak shows how much your contribution as an activist is needed. So whatever your cause is, and look, as I said, there's 70 Sustainable Development Goals, and each of those Sustainable Development Goals that the UN has set has got numerous sub-goals, and each of those will be relevant somewhere in your own community. And there's probably already an organisation working on them, and if not, there's an organisation you can join online, or start your own. But be aware of how much fantastic social action is already happening in the world, and use those skills that you've already developed, use the passion that you're building up, and apply those as soon as you can. There's no need to wait. Action now.
Action now, yeah. We've got to stand that all over, action now. And I feel like that's a really strong message to leave with, because, hopefully after this conversation, folk will decide, actually, I want to act. And that's the hope of this with social justice. And before you go, I do wonder, there may be a future Ella who's watching this and who wants to kind of lead an organisation like One Young World. What has it taken you to navigate leadership of such a international organisation? Like for yourself, what has it taken?
Look, I was given the opportunity to work at One Young World, unpaid, for a real time, because my mother co-founded it, right? So there's a big discussion going on in the West at the moment for listeners about Nepo babies. And I did get an opportunity because of someone I knew. At the time, One Young World had, single digit number of employees, and there was no guarantee of its success. So I would say, one, you've got to take a chance, and don't feel that there's going to be a ready-made opportunity with a red carpet rolled out for you. But if you do know someone and there is an opportunity, take it and give it a go. But I would say, look, a lot of things I had to do as a young woman who, whilst I did have this great opportunity because of working with my mom, a lot of people thought, well, she's only here because of her mom, she's not serious. So I always felt like I really had to prove myself and prove that I was going to be as good as any older or more experienced, NGO leader out there. And some of the meetings I went into aged 22 with mayors of cities.
You were 22 when you started?
I was younger. I was 19 when I started. But so when I was first of all having meetings with senior stakeholders, I think I was 22. And talk about imposter syndrome. That wasn't really a phrase then, but there was no chance to sit. There was no time to sit around and go, "Oh God, do I belong in this room?" I clearly didn't. I was a 22-year-old woman, but I had to get on with the job, and I think that I was really lucky to get all those experiences. And now one of my real passions is to make sure that our employees, however junior or senior they are getting experiences to have leadership moments and to experience things other than just their day job, because it's a really exciting organisation. I would say that anyone who wants to take on a leadership position young, I mentor a lot of young people, as you know, and I always say, look for an organisation that is high growth, that you think is going to grow really quickly over the next couple of years. Because as organisations grow, they don't have time to have a lengthy job interview for every single position when any opportunity comes through the door. They'll go, well, who do we have here? Great, Alvin, can you do this as well? And the opportunities will come. So join somewhere that's high growth and the opportunities will follow. But that does require you to be able to take a little risk and to identify high growth opportunities. But where there is growth, there is opportunity.
Wonderful. You mentioned just a bit ago about the woman who spoke to President Kennedy and this idea of her helping land the man on the moon. You have taken us on our beginning of our journey in the second series of the video podcast, well on our way to hopefully helping inspiring a next generation of Martin Luther King. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's such a great start and such a good conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as well. And we will make sure to promote One Young World and your book, because there's so much knowledge and information there for aspiring change makers. So thanks for your time. And let's go on and take action.
Thank you. It's been fantastic.
This educational content is absolutely free. Why? Because our vision is a world where anybody, no matter their background, can learn how to make a difference. To keep going, we need your help. Can you become our next patron? Can you help us reach 2,500 patrons? I really hope so. Whatever the case, hope you learned something today, and sending you peace and love. Let's keep learning.